Ideas in STEM Ed is a production of the Idea Engineering Student Center at UC San Diego, which works to promote community, success, and inclusion at all levels. My name is Darren Lipomi, Professor of Nanoengineering and Chemical Engineering and Faculty Director of the Idea Center. The purpose of this podcast is to provide a forum for the discussion of innovative and inclusive approaches to teaching and mentoring, and to support the personal and academic flourishing and success of students in science and engineering. To learn more about the Idea Center, visit jacobschool.ucsd.edu/idea. Dr. Wendy Marie Ingram is an advocate for mental health in academia. She is the founder and CEO of Dragonfly Mental Health, a nonprofit that works to improve the mental health of researchers, especially trainees such as graduate students and postdocs. Wendy earned her PhD in molecular and cell biology at Berkeley and was a postdoctoral fellow in psychiatric epidemiology at Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. Through Dragonfly, Wendy has spoken at many institutions and as a consultant has developed individualized plans for institutions seeking to improve the mental health of their researchers. Wendy Ingram, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
What is psychiatric epidemiology?
Well, epidemiology is the study of populations and usually the causes, or certainly at least the correlations with health conditions. And so that's why I was in the School of Public Health. But psychiatric epidemiology is a subdiscipline of that focuses in on the mental disorders, the psychiatric conditions that, at least in the US, are enumerated quite thoroughly in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, now on its 5th edition. So the DSM-5, any of those psychiatric conditions that are not considered, but often have many neural overlaps with neurology and many other conditions. The psychiatric epidemiology is what focuses in on those diseases.
After your PhD, did you take time doing something else, or did you go right into the postdoc?
So I actually, right after, the only way I got out of my PhD was by, it's a little unfair to phrase it that way, but for anyone who has completed a PhD, especially in the biological sciences, they may recognize this story of finish my work, finish my dissertation, everything looks good. But don't you want to just finish this last experiment? Oh, don't you want to just kind of stick around and train this new postdoc to take over your work? Well, wait, we just have like one more paper to write. And so things were dragging out about 9 months or so longer than I really had anticipated. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, I booked a one-way ticket to Thailand and told my PI, I'm leaving May 13th. I just no. So I went to Thailand for about 3 months and also spent a little bit of time in India following my PhD before starting my postdoc on the East Coast.
So what was it that made you switch fields so dramatically, one would think?
So my research interests have really always been in mental health. So that at least was consistent. But I was very focused on the molecular underpinnings of psychiatric disease. How do molecules and genes and genetics and different kinds of biology, as we can measure it so beautifully with biochemistry and molecular biophysics and molecular and cell biology and neuroimmunology, all these wonderful things I had very intentionally studied. How do those contribute to psychiatric disease, this really interesting constellation of illnesses that involve, I would say, our most complicated organ, the brain. But at the same time, really quite clearly, since even I was in graduate school, there was always another piece of life in the academic arena that was influencing me at the same time, and I engaging in it, which was advocating for the mental health of academics themselves. Initially my fellow PhD students at UC Berkeley, And then at Johns Hopkins, the same thing. And ultimately, that kind of advocacy work on the grassroots level, while we were doing good in our local space, there just seemed like there was such an opportunity and a gap that needed to be addressed in academia worldwide, where these small efforts, while very impactful and wonderful in their own way, weren't creating the systemic change we really need as well. And so in 2019, I both applied for my first faculty tenure track position and made it pretty far, but it was kind of more testing the waters. But I had my entire research plan for a bench biologist studying microglia in their role in depression and treatment-resistant depression, and how does electroconvulsive therapy work. This was what I was planning on studying. Mm-hmm. And that same fall, I was invited to give a plenary talk at a scientific conference in Berlin, talking about my advocacy work. And that advocacy work really generated a huge, overwhelming response from the audience. And it became abundantly clear that there was a global need. This was not something exclusively to the little realms of academia I've been in. Mm-hmm. And just it opened my eyes to, okay, well, what do we do? How do we do this? What would be the path if we were to? And as you know, with a very healthy respect, I would say for tenure track positions, I knew I couldn't do both. And so it really came down to a question of, what do I want to spend my time and effort on right now? And mm-hmm. what's going to feel the best in the moment? And ultimately, just to kind of say, well, what made me change fields so dramatically? It was loss. It was the loss of friends and colleagues and classmates, and specifically someone who's we're recording on May 23rd, 2022, and this is my friend Chris Alvaro, Dr. Chris Alvaro's birthday. Mm-hmm. So it's a very hard. It's a tough day. It's a tough anniversary for me because we named Dragonfly Mental Health in honor of Dr. Chris Alvaro, who we lost to suicide and depression at the age of 29 in 2018. And it was just something that wouldn't let me rest and wait until I got tenure in order to do more advocacy work, which I knew was kind of this or that. So either you go get tenure, which is a feat in and of itself for 5 to 7 years or so. And then you can maybe spend a little more time doing other things. So for me, it really came down to immediacy and where can I do the most in this world. And there are lots of other amazing neurobiologists out there studying microglia, and they maybe don't have the same ideas as me exactly, but I figured there are very few people who were really kind of positioned in a way for me and motivated in the way that I was to spearhead and lead these efforts to build Dragonfly Mental Health as a global organization.
That's wonderful. I can see I feel on a small scale a little bit of the, I don't know if surprise is the right word, but where you were asked in the situation where you were asked to speak not about your scientific work, but about your advocacy work. Last 2 years ago, I put a YouTube video up about my own struggles with generalized anxiety disorder and different physiological sequelae I've had and treatment that I've undergone. And then we actually met a few months later at the Beckman Scholars Symposium, Beckman Foundation Symposium, and I was asked, officially to talk about mental health in academia on a panel with you, and I think that also influenced my own interest in student services, student success services, and now ultimately, academic administration or leadership on the student side of things. So I definitely understand the call. There are a lot of organic materials chemists, but not all of them have the same interest in student advocacy and mental health, I think.
We are rare beasts, you and I.
I wanted to ask you what is special about graduate school or postdoc or being a researcher in academia that makes it those individuals especially vulnerable to mental health challenges?
There's three kind of domains that can quite easily be pointed to, I think. And it's tough because everybody is unique and everybody has their own personal lived experience and different biology and different upbringing and different experiences in life. And so each person is going to be different. But for academics, what we're seeing in literature and research that's now being done, and we need a lot more of it, by the way, so call to action. But we're kind of seeing some numbers like 6 to 8 times higher rates of depression and anxiety among graduate students than the general population. We are seeing in certain research that people with higher IQ and higher educational attainment report higher rates of depression and anxiety and mood disorders like bipolar disorder as well. And what's very concerning is that also what we're seeing is that these folks are less likely to seek treatment for these conditions, even though they are no, we do not understand them to the point of some of the other physical illnesses or heart disease or cancer maybe, but also it hasn't been funded quite as thoroughly as cancer. Unfortunately, I'd like to see that change as well. But we do know a lot about them, and we do know that the vast majority of depression, cases respond to first-line therapy. So like that is a really, really good thing to know that a lot of people don't know. And so there's a dearth across everyone in the world and in society in the US as well. But it pervades academia as well, a dearth of mental health literacy, basic knowledge about the both biological and environmental influences that cause and lead to depression, lead to anxiety disorders, lead to OCD or different like bipolar disorders, things like that. And these things we're now getting from the epidemiology, which looks at large populations. We're really getting the sense that this is affecting academics at higher rates. So why? You asked why. And one of the things is we don't know. Maybe people who end up, there are probably individual characteristics. We know there's genetic components to all of these things, some neurodevelopmental components. And so it's going to depend on the individual to a certain degree. And maybe there's something about these, some of these illnesses or some of the underlying or related biology of these illnesses that actually give rise to some of the things that make an excellent academic. So some folks have quipped to me before that having a surgeon with OCD is actually a great thing. They're going to make sure that everything is done exactly right, precisely the way it's supposed to. But there are benefits, and we've heard that certainly from the folks with bipolar disorder, that the hypomanic episodes can really allow their brain to work in a creative way that is so beneficial to them, that actually gives them an edge in the academic field that requires that kind of creativity intensity and ability to go for many, many weeks without very much sleep. But bipolar disorder is also a potentially lethal disease. It's something that I have. And, I do see great benefits with certain aspects of the way my brain works. But then depressive episodes, it is potentially lethal. It's really, really dangerous. So it's a double-edged sword, so to speak. And not all mental illnesses have good sides necessarily, but that's one potential hypothesis on the individual component that folks with higher IQ, with higher education, equipped for higher educational attainment, who do decide to go for it, may have neural diversity that kind of lends itself a little bit more to higher susceptibility to these illnesses. Another thing is the pressure. It's so high, it's so intense. And and you probably as a faculty member know better than most over your career, probably seeing like what the expectations are and how they just keep growing, even though it's one person. So from my perspective and speaking to folks that got their PhDs years and years and years ago, there was one faculty at UC Berkeley who was like, well, yeah, I had a tenure track position when I was 28. And I was like, I didn't graduate until I was after. And then I had to go do a 5-year postdoc. Like what, this is not what, it's not comparable anymore. So there's greater and greater expectations of what research goes into constituting a Nature paper, a Cell paper, science paper, things like that. There's also problems with the fact that these things are all behind paywalls. So the open access movement is interesting, counter to this archaic system that did used to be paper printing and journals being mailed out to people, and only certain individuals with certain backgrounds being able to access higher education. The diversity within the system and how that system either does or does not support their growth and their inclusion is a big systematic issue, and has adds a lot more pressure to women, people of color, people from socioeconomic status that were previously precluded from being even invited into this club of higher academic learning. And then and then the greater level, speaking as a mental health informaticist and someone, psychiatric epidemiologist, the mental access to mental health and really good mental health care is a huge challenge in a lot of areas, including the US. And so getting access to that care in a timely manner is a big component as well. And that's no different from, and sometimes even harder for academics than people who, finished their undergrad and got a job that has a healthcare system that they can go and, they decide they need some therapy for depression or anxiety. They get an appointment next week. At universities, which is usually where graduate students get their healthcare. I was at Berkeley and there was at least a 6-week waiting period from when I finally broke down and was like, okay, well, I probably need some help now. I'm really at my wit's end. I can't hold it together anymore. I reached out for help and it was like over a month.
Do you find, Wendy, that primary care doctors are maybe an underutilized resource in this regard? Because I think that, it's often easier to get an appointment with your PCP than it is with your campus mental health resources.
I do think it's an underutilized resource. And one of the things that is interesting from the medical informatics field is that the vast, vast majority of antidepressants, which treat both depression and anxiety and a whole host of other psychiatric conditions as a first-line treatment, like OCD, many conditions benefit from SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, as a first-line approach. And that is something that the vast majority are prescribed by PCP, by primary care physicians, not by psychiatrists. But there's also some problems there. And one of them is societal and stigma-based, is that most people wait 6 to 8 years after the onset of symptoms to seek treatment for depression. This is incredible. Like, imagine doing that for cancer. You're like, it's pre-screening, it's the prevention is the best medicine. And so the earlier people, but this is driven by stigma. People are worried about people judging them, especially people who their brain, like academics, identify their mind and their brain as their most useful tool that they rely on. And so there's a huge stigma for seeking care for that organ.
I think in the case of anxiolytic medication in particular, I think we are sometimes concerned that we would lose our edge, that it would numb the peaks, and that we need the anxiety in order to fuel the creativity. When I was a student, going back to undergrad, I always felt as though there was a gun to my head, like almost literally, like I almost felt like pressure on my skull, that would just drive me like an overclocked microprocessor, like I don't know, whatever my rating was, whatever Q factor, whatever it is, but I was getting more out of it than I was like endowed with, and I felt like I just had to keep up that intensity to achieve what it, whatever is success, such as it was. And, I'm thinking, you said 6 to 8 years before somebody starts seeking help. I'm thinking about my first, onboarding visit with my primary care doctor 10 years ago. And I got a diagnosis of hypertension. And I said, no, it's only high at the doctor. And so I got the blood pressure cuff and I monitored it 5 times a day for 2 weeks, and I brought back to him the printout and I said, look, it's fine. So we changed it from hypertension to white coat hypertension. And but he probably should have followed up with the question, like, is it just doctors' offices, or is it literally every time you are engaging in a social situation, or teaching, or working with a mentee, or working with the dean or the department chair? And of course, the answer would be, well, okay, it's basically high all the time. And
but not when I'm alone in a room with my blood pressure cuff.
Exactly. Right. With the door closed, and after I've meditated for 5 minutes. And then finally, 2 primary care doctors later, I just said, look, I can't sleep. What can you do for me? I'm like, I had a harrowing year in 2021. Lost multiple people close to me, including my father. And I was sleeping like 5 hours a night for all of 2021, max. Like I wouldn't fall asleep until midnight. Then I'd wake up at 3:30 and not be able to fall back asleep. And so, I was concerned when the doctor said, well, there are these treatment options available. There's CBT, there is cognitive behavioral therapy, there are SSRIs. And I was worried, like that I would lose my edge, that I wouldn't be able to produce anymore. But then I realized, after being in treatment, that this was not helping me. It was not like an overclocked microprocessor. Like, that's not how my brain worked. This was impeding me. It was causing me to say no to meetings, to say no to grant proposals because I didn't, want to get rejected or whatever. It was really a ball and chain on my life. And it did take, too long, from 18, probably 16, when I realized that I had serious anxiety, to 38, and it was a long time.
Yeah, that's far too common of a story too, but I'm glad you're sharing it, because I think it's so important to get that message across to folks that look up to you, that are you're teaching, that are going to see you as dean now, and just assume you have it all together and you've never had any problems, because the default is not to talk about these things, is not to share these kinds of experiences or struggles publicly, let alone, officially in an academic and professional setting. That's just, it hasn't been done. And that has really caused a huge burden unnecessarily on a lot of folks who are probably struggling with the exact same thing as you, and really resonate with what you just said about your worries about seeking treatment, and also concept of, well, no, this gives me my edge. And there's this power of storytelling that people who know you and look up to you and know your name and know your science and know your research are going to hear this and hear your previous story, and anywhere and everywhere you talk about it, and just open their minds and realize that they're not alone, and that there is a way out, and it's better than the current situation potentially.
Yeah. And I realize too that I'm in a privileged position. I'm a tenured faculty member. I've had some amount of professional success, and I can get away with saying these things, because I'm not worried that if I said in a job application that I've overcome a moderate psychiatric issue, that I'm not going to get the job, right? So it's not like we're expecting people to just divulge every thought that's gone through their mind, but at least when certain people, that they might look up to, are open about it, it might at least encourage them to seek help. I wanted to ask, what's the difference between good, stress that might be stress that will help you write that paper, like challenge stress, and when does it cross over in and sadness? Something didn't work. Of course, I'm going to be sad about it, right? That's only natural. And when does it go from normal to pathology? When does it become dangerous?
So one of the things that I've heard from professional psychiatrists that we refer to, because myself and Dragonfly are not in the business of delivering healthcare or health advice. We're delivering health information, and trying to do that. So just to make that abundantly clear, I'm not a
disclaimer
psychologist. But I am a mental health researcher. I know a lot about this field, and I work very closely with clinicians, psychiatrists, and psychologists. And what Dr. Ray DiPaolo, who's been treating patients for 30 some odd years at Johns Hopkins and was the former head of that department, and the current president of the National Network's Depression Centers, he recently answered some questions for Dragonfly on something called Dragonfly Asks the Experts. And we asked him, when is the right time to seek care for your mental health? And to boil it down, it's a great thing and it's way better coming from him. But the takeaway message was, if you're considering it, it's probably a good idea to check in. If you're already there, even considering it, you probably should have done it before. Because he never, in seeing 20,000 or so patients over his career, he said he could count 3 people who, quote unquote, came in too soon. So the vast majority of folks really just are not getting care when it's very appropriate and very helpful at those earlier stages where it's easier to treat, where it's faster. There haven't been a pile-on of a whole bunch of other conditions and issues and severe sleep disorders now tied to your depression or your anxiety, or heart conditions that are now tied to that, or these other kinds of things that play into it, and all of these illnesses. And so that's kind of the shorter, pithier version. But another way to look at it would be from kind of the mental health spectrum. There's like mentally healthy. There's stress, which everybody has, planned and unplanned stress in their life, which can range from knowing that you have a test coming up, or knowing that you have a tenure track position interview coming up, or postdoc talk, or whatever it is. You've got an anticipated, or something happens in your life, the experiment fails, or the animal facility, all the power goes out for 3 days or something, some catastrophic, huge thing. Or I don't know, a pandemic hits and everybody stops working for 2 years. Things outside your control, which are stressful. But that movement from stressed to healthy again is usually pretty easy and usually pretty quick. Distress is another stage past that, which doesn't meet the criteria for any of these illnesses, where if you do go to a psychologist, if you do go to your PCP, if you do go to a psychiatrist, there's distress and then there's disease. And those two things are differentiated by whether or not you meet clinical criteria for a disease. But distress is a very, very common state for a lot of people to be in. And that is a state that might be, quote, subclinical, but still it's not easy. It's not quick to get bounce back to that mentally healthy state. And so folks in that gray zone, that kind of area, really is probably a huge chunk of folks for a long period of time, which can eventually get into that disease state. The disease state can also be, people can have illnesses like yourself, like me, that we find the right treatment for us and for our situation that balances what we care about in our own personal and professional lives. And then we can be in a mentally healthy state and still have a disease. And then crisis is that far end of the spectrum, which far, far, far too often we let people get to, and we let ourselves get to. And that's when people become suicidal. That's when people are experiencing a psychotic episode or a panic attack. And that's a really tough state. And it's acute and it's emergent. And often the person is not able to handle it and control it themselves. And they really need a supportive, educated community around them that knows how to respond and how to help them in that moment, and get them to the care that they need. So the other way to look at your question is to say, how easy is it for you to bounce back to a mentally healthy state? And if it's not easy and it's not happening fast, you're beyond just stress. So it's worth checking in with somebody who is a professional and can help you identify what's going on with you.
As a trained molecular biologist, and this is more of a technical question, what do you appreciate about psychiatric epidemiology, psychiatric disease, that maybe a person in your field without that training, competent and talented as they are, might not have?
Well, the first thing that pops into my head of like that I just find fascinating was realizing at some point that depression phenotypes are actually kind of a feature of our biology, not necessarily a bug. And so this was what I realized when I really started looking in or studying immunology during grad school before I got to the psych epi. But I did get, so I started biochemistry and molecular biophysics as an undergrad, but I also got a degree in psychology. So I had abnormal and I knew all these other things about the brain and psychiatric disease back then. But for my PhD, as I started exploring, cytokines and inflammatory processes and what happens when you get infected with a worm versus a bacteria versus a virus and these different immune responses. I may get a little technical here, but I was just blown away. I was like, wait. So your immune response when you get infected with a virus is actually the thing that makes you feel sick and tired and achy and groggy and socially withdraw and cognitively slow. And wait, your immune system is doing that? It's your immune system. It's not the virus. It's your own immune system kicking in all of these inflammatory cytokines in order to rush through and control your body and turn you into a lethargic, withdrawing, slow person. So basically, it can fight off the infection while you sit your ass in bed. But then if you have stress, as we like to say about humans, not like we've been chased by lions super recently, or very many of us at any rate. If a lion comes to your cave or whatever, and you're feeling sick from your own cytokines and your own immune system trying to save your energy so you can fight off this virus that it's working on, but a lion pops up, all of a sudden, this whole other system kicks into place and suppresses that immune response and drives down those cytokines. And instantly you can jump up and run your ass off and probably do a whole bunch of things that you can't normally do on a day-to-day basis without that stress. So it's just like, it's built into our biology. It's amazing. And of course, it doesn't quite work all the time. So especially
I have a specific memory of giving a talk to a bunch of investors. So this was I was doing a pitch for a financial startup that tries to get wealthy individuals to put money into research causes. And I was the featured researcher, and it was a bunch of wealth managers and wealthy individuals. And I was nervous. I was also really sick with a cold. And this was back in a time when you could still leave your house if you were coughing, and people would just be sort of annoyed, but they didn't think that they were going to die, from your exhalations. And I thought, how am I going to manage this? This is like the worst cold I've ever had, and I couldn't breathe. But then I got up there and I was completely fine. Maybe the cytokine were all suppressed in the immune reaction because of all the cortisol and adrenaline.
Yes. I suspect if we had taken some blood draws prior to and during the talk and then following, and then I bet you felt real bad after that high went off, huh?
Right. And if anyone doesn't believe that the immune response is actually what makes us sick, just think about asymptomatic spread of COVID-19, because these virus particles are budding from the cells in your respiratory tract. And evidently, if your immune system hasn't figured it out yet, you're still infected, you're infecting others, and you're not feeling those those
Oh,
membrane bound particles being burst out of your cells.
yep, yeah.
um,
Which is why I've always, anytime people complain about the like, oh well, I got the vaccine or I got the booster and it made me feel sick for a couple of days, and I was like, good, that means it's working. Well, did I get COVID? No, you did not get COVID. It is a vaccine. It doesn't work like that. You didn't get COVID. But your immune system is what makes you feel like crap. So
so
when
can
it's
you
too long or at the wrong time or just popped off during the wrong period of time, like, then of course our brain and biology and everything else that goes with it is going to be negatively impacted. So then that's when we have disease.
Mhm. So what is a typical day like for you at Dragonfly? What sorts of activities do you do? How, I imagine every day is different.
Mm.
Um, every case is different. Every client is different. How does it work?
So I have a lot of meetings, but they're all very different from each other. It's very exciting. It's very dynamic. Yeah, so my role at Dragonfly is CEO and co-founder. And then, but what I do is really wear all the hats that are necessary at any given time. So there's a lot of amazing volunteers who have come in over the last 2 years and stepped into leadership roles and taken over different leading different projects and different working groups and things like that. So I do want to start off by saying this is not a one-woman show. This is totally a team effort. And but it has been really exciting and interesting and beautifully dynamic for me. I love it. And so a fair amount of what I do is, and because what has really taken off with Dragonfly has been our on-campus consulting services. So we work directly with campuses to bring them evidence-based programming in mental health literacy, skills training, as well as fighting stigma within their own communities. And so all of those things are wonderful and exciting and also tailored. We tailor them ourselves with our content experts, myself being one of them, to the academic environment. But we engage with clients. So we've worked with we've delivered over 160 programs in just 2 years to more than 20,000 academics in
Wow,
15
that's
countries.
wonderful.
And so we're global, we're, working with all disciplines within academia. And one of the things that one of our tenets is like, yes, we build as much universal principles that we use as our structure and our backbone. But for every community, we meet with them at least once, if not multiple times, in order to engage and really understand what's going on in their community, at their institution, in their country, at within their discipline, whatever the case may be, and find out where we need to tailor things. And that goes into every single program we deliver too. And then we work with them to also help identify what's going to be the most helpful first step for their community. Do they want to start with a general overview of mental health literacy? Or is burnout very clearly an issue and you want to start there? Or is it a mentorship kind of problem? So we just recently delivered a program focused on mentoring as a two-way street to the European Space Agency for their postdoctoral fellows, which was just fantastic. But there were a couple of meetings that had to happen prior to that delivery where I met with postdocs that were in that programming. I don't know what it's like to be an astrophysicist. Let alone at their, Europe's version of NASA.
Hmm.
So there's some conversations that should be had and surveys that we can do. And so building surveys, building content, speaking with clients, connecting with folks that also want to build more programming and systems in their place. I love connecting with other folks that want to do this kind of work on the ground level. And so Dragonfly also supports those efforts, especially for student groups, completely free of charge. And in fact, 70% of our programs are delivered fully sponsored. So donations from supporters are really the so imperative for us to be able to function and operate and continue to grow as well. And then one of the things that has just been inspirational to me has been bringing together these volunteers and finding out what they're passionate about. So I interact with a lot of my volunteers and other kind of executive leaders, as well as working group leaders, to find out what they need in order to move forward different efforts that we have. So one of the working groups that has been my absolute favorite has been systemic change. And from that group's efforts of engaging with the general population, as well as internally with our own 300 volunteers from more than 45 countries, we were able to discern and distill kind of 5 major categories within which good, sustainable mental health within an academic setting can be achieved. And then that was the keystone upon which we built and designed our comprehensive program. So we deliver these individual talks and workshops and things that are 1 to 2 hours. And that's the majority of what we've done over the last 2 years. But we just launched with UC Berkeley and the Molecular and Cell Biology Department a comprehensive 3-year program to create fundamental and long-lasting change in their culture and climate
that's
around
wonderful.
mental health. Yeah.
Is it usually at the department level that reaches out to you, or the division level, or the campus level? What's the kind of mode?
Yeah, so it's mostly individuals within some kind of unit, like a division or a department, and also country to country, they're kind of called different things too. But so it's often a faculty member or a student or a postdoc or somebody who has heard about Dragonfly and is just interested in creating change. They know they need it, but they don't know how to bring it. And then they talk to us and we figure out a path forward. So the way we recommend delivering programs is usually at departmental levels or the equivalent. So because there's so much benefit from getting everybody within a community that is contributing to the culture of that community on board, and giving them the language, giving them the basic understandings, and then facilitating discussion within that nexus group. That is what creates change and awareness and destigmatization. And so that's where we like and try to recommend working on kind of that level. And that's why we're doing that at Berkeley at the departmental level. There are opportunities to do wider, school-wide or university-wide kind of approaches as well. And we can definitely talk about that, but there's so much difference between the history department and the math department, the chemistry department and the molecular and cell biology department. There's just the engineering. I mean, so you're now going into this role that's, I'm curious what your kind of perspectives are about, like, well, there's engineering, and then there's like, this kind of engineering and that kind of engineering and this kind of engineering, and like, how much would it really benefit the entire community by having one size fits all approach to things? Like, sometimes one size fits all works, but very often, especially at the graduate and above level, I really am of the persuasion that you have to find the reasonable breakpoints where culture is created. And then work within that size, if that makes sense.
It does. And I think that's a great place to wrap up. Just quickly, where can our viewers find you?
So we have this beautiful website my brother designed for us that is findable at dragonflymentalhealth.org. We also have a YouTube channel that you can look up. Just search in YouTube Dragonfly Mental Health, and we have an entire channel. We make all of our programs open access and available freely to anyone. So you can check us out there as well. We're on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn. And so please, feel free to follow us, connect with us there. And then we have on our website a bunch of different forms that you can look at our contacts tab and or contact us tab and either send us a general inquiry or contact us and say you're interested in booking us, bringing us to your campus, and or volunteering. This is such an incredible group of people from all over the world and all different disciplines. We're a little STEM heavy, so anybody else is more than welcome, I promise. But yes, we love our STEM folks too. So please reach out and express some interest in volunteering if you want. We ask everybody to just do what they can when they can. So we're building a worldwide community that's really focused on making academia a mentally healthy place where we can all do our best science and research and enjoy ourselves.
Awesome. Such important work. Thank you so much. Dr. Wendy Marie Ingram, thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Ideas in STEM Ed, a production of the Idea Engineering Student Center in the Jacobs School of Engineering at UC San Diego. This episode was edited and engineered by Sky Lee, with theme music written and performed by John Viviani. Title art was created by Caitlin Wong. Special thanks to Sarah Eckert for guest booking and marketing. The Idea Center works to promote community, success, and inclusion at all levels. To reach us for guest suggestions and other feedback, please send an email to ideadirector@eng.ucsd.edu. And to learn more about our programs, visit jacobschool.ucsd.edu/idea. As a final note, the views expressed by me or the guests do not necessarily reflect those of the Idea Center, the Jacobs School of Engineering, or UC San Diego. See you next time.